The Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex is one of the largest urban areas in the United States. With over 8 million people living in this sprawling area, two passenger airports serve the commercial flight needs of the region: Dallas-Fort Worth International, often just DFW, and Love Field. These two airports are pretty different, so let's briefly compare the two side by side. A brief note before we begin: I'll be using some 2019 statistics throughout this video, just like I did in my DC airports video, since last year's numbers were majorly impacted by the ongoing pandemic. Okay, let's not waste any more time and get into this comparison. To get us started, let's take a look at where these airports are within the Dallas-Fort Worth area. DFW is in a pretty central location for the region, with it being located mostly in the cities of Grapevine and Irving. On the other hand, Love Field is much closer to downtown Dallas, well within the city limits on the northwest side. What you might notice about this map is that Fort Worth doesn't have its own nearby commercial airport. DFW and Love Field are the only two such airports in the area. More on that in a second. These two airports have pretty fascinating histories, so let's get started. Love Field is much older than DFW by several decades. It opened on October 19, 1917 as a flight training field for the Army Air Service during World War I. Following the war, it was purchased by the city of Dallas in 1927 and opened for civilian use, receiving its first paved runways by 1932. The military used the field again during the Second World War, and following this war, commercial service greatly expanded. During the 1950s, to compete with Love Field's increasing share of the market, Fort Worth opened a new commercial airport called Greater Southwest International Airport, GSW for short, which was located halfway between the two cities. However, Love Field remained successful while GSW struggled with its traffic numbers and had its last carrier cease service in 1969. By 1974, a few months after DFW Airport opened, GSW had shut down completely. Meanwhile, passenger numbers dropped sharply at Love Field. In 1978, after airline deregulation, Southwest Airlines planned to start regular interstate service there. This created concerns that DFW's stability could be impacted by a resurgence in flights at Love Field. Representative Jim Wright pushed an act through Congress named the Wright Amendment, which limited mid- and large-sized aircraft at Love Field to fly only to states bordering Texas and prohibited connecting flights. Following decades of pushback, the act was eventually modified and then fully repealed in 2014. Today, Southwest Airlines is headquartered at Love Field and is responsible for nearly all of the airport's flights. Shifting to DFW, the creation of Dallas-Fort Worth International had been the subject of discussion for decades. In 1940, the Civil Aeronautics Administration, precursor to the FAA, set aside nearly $2 million for a joint Dallas and Fort Worth airport. It was nearly constructed in the city of Arlington that decade. However, disagreements over the location and the opening of GSW further delayed the project into the 1960s, when Love Field was becoming overly congested. The federal government put its foot down by 1964, setting a 6-month deadline for the cities to agree upon a new location for the airport. They chose a site just north of the declining GSW, and construction began in 1969. The airport opened to the public on September 23, 1973, and the opening ceremony saw the first landing of a Concorde jet in the United States. During the 1980s, American Airlines established the airport as its first hub and moved their headquarters to the commercial park, which replaced GSW. Throughout the late 20th century, the airport continued to expand, eventually becoming one of the busiest airports in the US and the world. As mentioned, DFW is one of the world's busiest airports. In 2019, it served 75,066,956 passengers, which was its busiest year to date. This made it the 10th busiest airport in the world by passenger volume and the 4th busiest in the US behind Atlanta, Los Angeles, and Chicago O'Hare. During 2020, the most popular domestic destination was Los Angeles, while the most popular internationally was Cancun. DFW's website lists 22 passenger airlines that the airport serves, thanks to the many international flights offered. However, American is by far the dominant airline at DFW, handling nearly 2/3 of all passengers. The airport currently operates 7 runways and 5 terminals. Love Field is significantly smaller in just about every way compared to DFW. However, it still had a respectable passenger count of 16,780,158 in 2019, which ranked it as the 33rd busiest airport in the US that year. In 2020, the busiest domestic route was to Denver. The airport does not currently offer international destinations. Only 3 passenger airlines operate at Love Field, those being Alaska, Delta, and Southwest. As touched upon before though, Southwest is responsible for nearly all flight operations at the airport, serving well over 90% of the passenger count. Love Field has 2 runways and a single terminal building. Of course, it's important to know how to actually get to these airports in the first place. DFW is well connected to Dallas Area Rapid Transit, or DART, trains. The Orange Line, a light rail train, has a stop at Terminal A. Meanwhile, the Tex Rail commuter train runs between downtown Fort Worth and Terminal B. And the Trinity Rail Express commuter train between Dallas and Fort Worth stops just south of the airports, and a bus takes passengers the rest of the way. For those traveling by car, the International Parkway runs directly through the airport, which connects it to Texas Highway 183 to the south, and Interstate 635 and Texas Highways 114 and 121 to the north. Love Field is not quite as well connected to public transit. The DART, Orange, and Green lines make stops near the airport, but not directly at the terminal facility. To get there, bus route 524 runs from the Inwood Love Field station to the terminal. Roads that pass near the airport include Texas Highway 12 and Interstate 35E. Let's take a brief moment to address the worst accidents to have occurred at each airport. DFW's worst incident took place on August 2nd, 1985. Delta Airlines Flight 191, making an intermediate stop at the airport on its way from Fort Lauderdale to Los Angeles, lost control due to a microburst shortly before landing. The plane crashed over a mile short of the runway, resulting in the deaths of 136 people on board and 1 person on the ground. The worst accident at Love Field was on November 29, 1949, and also took place during the landing approach of a flight making an intermediate stop. American Airlines Flight 157, which had left LaGuardia in New York and was heading to Mexico City, lost one of its engines during the first leg of the flight. The crew then made critical mistakes while attempting to land with one engine out, causing them to lose control during landing. The plane slid off the runway and crashed into several buildings, which led to the deaths of 28 people on board. To finish things off on a more positive note, let's turn to the future of these airports. DFW is working on the construction of a 6th terminal called Terminal F, which was originally set to be open in 2025. Alongside this new terminal, Terminal C was slated to receive a renovation, as it's the only terminal that hasn't been refurbished since the airport opened. Unfortunately, the Terminal F project was placed on hold due to the decreased demand for air travel during the pandemic, while the Terminal C renovations will be moving forward. Over at Love Field, the airport announced a complete rebuilding of one of its runways, which was last repaved in 1990 with concrete meant to only last 20 years and under the limited traffic levels created by the Wright Amendment. This project is set to conclude in 2022, which leaves the airport with just 1 usable runway currently. And that wraps up this quick comparison of the Dallas-Fort Worth area's airports. Thanks for watching this video as always. If you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed and dropped a like. And be sure to check out my other airport comparison videos. Until next time, have a good one.